So we are on record. All right. Hi, everybody. It's Julie with Warwick's, and we are here tonight with a great conversation with Sara Schaefer. Welcome to Warwick's.
Hello.
And Jeniffer Thompson, who's going to do a wonderful interview with us. So a couple quick things about Warwick's, just for those of you who are joining us that may not know what Warwick's is or where Warwick's is. We are located in San Diego, La Jolla, California. We are open for business during this COVID time, but masks, social distancing. But what I always like to say, any way that there is to get a book, you can get it from Warwick. So I'll be putting in, we're recording this right now. We'll have it on our YouTube channel. We'll put it onto Facebook. So we'll put links on how to order Sara's book from all of that. So anywhere you're at though, you can order a book from us, warwicks.com. Join our email list. We're doing wonderful events for everybody. So join the fun. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jeniffer Thompson, who will start the program with us. So Jeniffer Thompson is a personal branding expert, digital marketing strategist, and host of the Premise podcast. And this recording will also be on the Premise podcast as well. She's an author and speaker who delivers strategy-rich content and actionable tools that educate and empower authors. She and her husband, Chad, co-founder of Monkey See Media, in 2004 and have been creating award-winning book cover designs and author websites ever since. She's a co-founder of the San Diego Writers Festival. She serves on the board of the San Diego Memoir Writers Association and is currently writing her own coming-of-age memoir. And we'll find out a little later how we can connect with Sara and Jeniffer. So with that, I'm going to leave the screen. You guys have a great conversation.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, Sara. How are you?
I'm good.
So this is such an honor for me. I am so excited about this book. Grand is a gorgeous book, but before I dive in and start gushing all over the place on this book, I want to introduce you officially. Sara Schaefer is a stand-up comedian and writer. She was the co-host of MTV's Nikki and Sarah Live and has written for numerous television shows, including The Fake News with Ted Nelms and the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor. Sara's solo show, Little White Box, debuted to a sold-out run at the 2017 Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and her Comedy Central stand-up presents special premiered in 2019, which is fantastic. Sara lives in Los Angeles. How is it there in Los Angeles? How are you doing?
It's fine. Feel like I haven't been outside in a long time because I've been really busy, but lucky to be busy and
right?
Yeah, feeling crazed, but like grateful crazed, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, this is a big deal. This is a very kind of different for you. This is a very personal way to be on, in the public eye. So I imagine it's been kind of, surreal. It's a very personal story. You share a lot with your readers. Did you ever have this feeling when it was set to be published and you had a pub date, like, oh my God, what have I done? Can I take it back?
That was a roller coaster ride from day one. I mean, from, starting to work on this book and being really afraid to share some of this stuff. I mean, I was talking to some family about it, of just like, this hits every corner for me. Like every little dark corner in my brain gets touched, and every part of my life, is visited at some point. And so it's a lot at once even though it feels like just a sliver. I feel like I'm only revealing just a sliver, but like the Grand Canyon, it goes
deep
all the way. It goes all the way to the bottom of my soul. But it is very different than my stand-up in that, it's really, my stand-up has always been personal, but it's not as revealing as this, or as heartfelt, and there's a lot of sincere in this book. But I think that that's really actually more of who I am as a storyteller. This is a more comfortable place for me to be. And being funny is really, it's a labor. It's like, I think when I first started out in comedy, I was more of a storyteller. in ways. I did music. I tried a lot of different stuff, but one of the things that I did when I first really started working on how am I a solo performer on stage, once I moved away, I started with some comedy, some musical comedy. I was doing funny songs. I started telling little stories from my life, and then at the end I would have a video of it, like from my childhood, or
oh wow, okay, that's kind of cool.
I'd read a note a boy wrote me. I would have some kind of media
prop, right?
Or prop that went with
right.
it. And I loved. It was harder for me to write short punchliney jokes. I've gotten much better at that over time, but ultimately I think this is actually creatively in some ways more comfortable, but also very difficult and challenging, and I've never done anything like this before. So
well, you can't tell. I mean, it's so good. It's like, it's so raw and it's so personal. And I think it's something that so many of us can relate to. I mean, talk about going deep, like the Grand Canyon. There's this reoccurring theme in your book, this moral anxiety in Grand, an obsession with being good and being seen as good, but also this internal struggle with not feeling good enough.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's kind of a redemptive story. Did you know when you sat down to write it that it would reveal, I mean, did you know that this was the theme of the story, or did it kind of reveal itself as you were writing?
It kind of went all over the map for a while there. I think anyone who's tried to write a memoir thinks they have an idea, and then you sit down to write it and you're like, what is this? No.
Totally.
And it's too much flying around in your head and too much from your life to think about and try to include. And but when I first came up with the idea for the book and was working on the proposal, the black and white thinking, moral anxiety was a central theme. What I didn't know yet, and what I discovered in the book, was where that really came from. I knew on the surface, but I really explored it more deeply, and then how it plays out in my life now. But how it's so funny. And I know that I'm sure I'm being very cliche when I say this, but my therapist, like a memoir writer being like, my therapist helped me a lot. But
memoir is therapy. Let's just be clear.
Yeah. But when I started working with my current therapist now about 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, she would just say, you've got public and you've got private. Your public self and your private self. And she kept being public versus private. And I would just be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And she's like, that's part of your problem, is that you don't know what I'm talking about. And so one theme that really came up that I didn't realize while writing the book was how much of my story and who I am is shaped by wanting to control the narrative of your life and the stories you tell yourself versus those that you tell the world, and the voice in your head telling you one thing, but then the reality being something else, and the lies that the negative voice tells you, or other people telling your story for you and wanting to control and take back your story. All those things were probably the part that I really wasn't expecting.
Interesting. Yeah, I find that when you're writing memoir, well, first of all, it's scary as hell. It's like, oh, I'm putting myself out onto this page and I hope people won't crucify me for it. But then all of a sudden you start to remember things. And I do feel like there's so much healing in discovering things about yourself maybe you didn't realize as you analyze a scene, or talk about things that are kind of painful. And I laughed and I cried throughout this book. Like, it's so, like I said, it's raw, it's honest, it's real life. One of the things I was thinking about, like, this is a really good time for this book right now. I know it's maybe doesn't feel like the best time to release a book during COVID-19, but it's a really good book for people to read during COVID-19, because I've had this theme in my life, and I think you've experienced this too, based on what I read. But so myself, my clients, and my friends, we have this sense of like guilt, like we're supposed to act a certain way, and we're overwhelmed by this like burden. everything feels overwhelming, and it feels hard, and it feels emotional. And, with Black Lives Matter and COVID and politically, like sometimes I feel like, can I get out of bed today? But then I feel guilty. Like, who am I to feel like, oh, woe is me, when I have it so good? So I don't know, when I was reading this book, I kind of felt like, it's like permission to like, yeah, it's okay to like feel these things. And, we all face our emotions, and like you faced them head on, wrote about them, and shared them with the world.
Oh, thank you. That means so much to me. I mean, it really, I feel like going through this process of writing this book has made it easier for me to get through this really crazy experience we're all living through. Because if I didn't have the tools that I have now and the perspective I have now, I think moral anxiety right now is forefront in our public conversation, because we are in a situation where we have to care for others, and we have to put others into our mind of like, I have to wear a mask, not just to protect myself, but to protect others. How something so simple, so explosive of an issue, that is fascinating to me. And also that I see a lot of shaming happening on every level. It's not a left, right, blue, red thing. It's within every little group of, oh, you went to your parents' house to stay. You went upstate. You went, you did this. I'm at home doing this, and you're breaking the rules that I've set up for my rules. Everyone's obsessed with rules right now and policies, but we don't have all that information, and everyone's weighing the risk of going out in the world. And I've thought a lot about how this pandemic I feel I have become a more private person over the past 5 years, but now the book is like me going out in the world, and I'm taking this risk. And so I feel like I'm coming out of my own mental lockdown right now.
And what a time to come out of your,
Well, it's definitely a time where a book like this, I think, I would hope that people would read it and realize, one, and tying it to the Black Lives Matter, the uprising that we're in, and that there's a real reckoning going on amongst a lot of white people, which is overdue. I myself, it's a journey, a process. I felt that I was woke. I hate that word because it's overused, but I felt like I had gone through a sort of awakening earlier, but this was a new reckoning of, I have way more to learn, more to do. And then really thinking about my book, which, in my book, I really did think about, before all this George Floyd stuff and everything. I mean, so I've been working on the book for 3 years. There was early versions that had some discussion of race in it, and our whiteness in this story as a family. And I chose not to really go into it because, and I'm struggling with that moral choice. I didn't know if I could handle it. There was too much I was trying to tell, and I was like, this just isn't that book. And I don't know, is my voice even needed in the conversation? There's a lot of that, like, should I even say anything right now? My voice isn't needed. Step aside. There's a lot of people telling you right now what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. That's really stressful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as a white person, coming from a life of, privilege, just simply being white, that I'm with you. I thought, before all, Black Lives happened, which I'm so glad it did. And I'm so glad to see people like, rising up and speaking that this enough is enough. But then I have this feeling of like, should I even put my voice in the conversation? Like, who am I to have a voice? And yet I'm passionate about it. My eyes are opening, like I'm just seeking out information, and we've kind of gotten off track, but I'm absolutely with you. And I hope that other people, other white people in particular, will like, hey, pay a little more attention, like be a little more aware, a lot more aware of, what is happening in this world and the social justice that we need to see. But I'm going to totally change the subject.
Yeah, totally. I get off on a tangent so easy.
I do too. So we could be here all night long.
Reconvene.
I wondered though, because there's a scene in the book. So now I'm going to go back and then I'll change the subject. But there is a point in the book where, you know, your mom starts this wonderful organization, you know, helping less fortunate people. And I wondered at some point about, you know, the privilege, the life of privilege. And you do mention it in your book, going from, you know, the side of the tracks where you're all privileged and you get a pinball machine for Christmas, to the other side of the tracks where your mom rewraps gifts to make it look like there's more, to create that special magic feeling on Christmas. Like, I so appreciated that there was so much love in this book. Like, I love your family.
I hear that through the book.
Yeah, like,
that's
just
what I wanted to do.
Well, it really comes across, but you know, and it just, you know, memoir for me is like, you're not alone. You're not the only person who might have experienced this in life, who feels guilt, who feels that demon telling you you're not good enough, you shouldn't be doing this, and then to say, well, I'm going to write a book about it. Like, it's pretty awesome.
Well, and just
needed.
Yeah, I mean, to your point about privilege, I mean, my family went through a downgrade, you know, in class,
so to speak. Yeah.
But my parents were really, they taught me how to change, how to make amends, how to repair, and to tell the truth. And that is something that I would never trade. I'm so glad that my dad made that choice, and the choices my mom then made with him after that point, where I learned, you know, that even though it was traumatizing and I talk a lot in the book about the long tail of that, and that I'm still wired a certain way because of the way things happened when I was very young. But that forgiveness, how to forgive, how to move forward when you've been humiliated or humiliated yourself.
Right. Which is normally the case, right?
When you've really fucked up, and the thought of, how could I possibly move forward? And then just to go and say, I don't care what the consequences are. This is the truth. And I need to fix it. And it can't live like this anymore. And that is that gives you courage. I think I've always been someone who's like, never stop dreaming, because my parents, that all happened in their 40s. I'm not even the age they were when that happened. And my mom and dad had a whole second chapter of their lives. And so it's in some ways made me risk tolerant when it comes to life changes, going after a career change, you know. I mean, some of it is like, you know, like, who cares? I'll figure out a way to pay for it. That can be bad. You know, like, we'll make it work. We'll get scrappy. You know, that kind of scrappiness I got from that experience. But then it can also, you know, but I also just became so morally rigid from it, of like, I'm never going to make a mistake. Well, that's not a good place to be in either. So, but it's the complicatedness of it, and the gray area, which I've learned to be more comfortable with, that is the takeaway of living in the in-between is hard, and social media makes it hard, but not all good or all bad. You're not all one thing.
Right. Yeah. Like, things are very black and white for us when we're children, you know, and I love how you open the book too, you know, with Talkie Turtle. And I don't want to give anything away, but you know, and Talkie Turtle comes back as a callback later. It's just so well done. And I won't mention that either, because you got to read it. But I want to talk about when you decided to write this book and telling your family, hey, I'm going to write this memoir. You know, it's your story, but it's their story too. You know, did you get any pushback? Were they freaked out? Like, how did that go?
Yeah, there was definitely not pushback. You know, my family was, you know, they were wonderful. I mean, one member, I won't call out specifics, and just in case they don't want to be called out specifically, but one sibling was like, you know, you don't need my permission, but I appreciate you asking me. And everyone expressed fears.
Sure.
everybody did. My dad, you know, like, but they could not have been more supportive. And there were some parts of the book that I very specifically went over with people that were more sensitive to make sure they were okay with the way I was characterizing certain things. But I didn't let them read it until February, like
of 2020.
Yeah, January or February. Yeah.
Wow.
Like the very last draft.
Wow. You wanted it to be right.
And I'm glad I didn't. That was the advice everyone gave me. I mean, some people do it differently. They're sending off pages, you know, they're sending off chapters. It's almost like a group effort. But I decided, on the advice of some wise people, to let them see it towards the end, mainly because it changed so much. And I'm really glad that I showed them the final version, because it was too much of a mess, and then they'd have to read it again. And you know, every time
you want it to be fresh. Yeah.
Every time I sat down to read it, it was hell. You know, I don't want them to have to go through it again unless they want to, you know. So they could not have been more supportive. And the day that I sent it to them and they read it, they all read it right away. And I've said this before, but I was walking on air. I mean, it could have been, the book could have disappeared the next day and no one else could have read it. But the fact that they liked it meant everything to me.
That's awesome.
So that's been just really wonderful for the relationships in my family, of feeling, I was already close to them, but just knowing you're so loved and taken care of. I'm very fortunate to have that type of family. And that's my mom's legacy too. It was nothing mattered more to her than for her children to remain close.
You're going to make me cry.
I know.
Because I totally, like, there were so many moments in this book where I literally could not stop crying. But I gotta say, like, you know, there's like the sad cry, like Magnolia cry, and then there's like the warm, fuzzy, this is so good cry. And there was so many so good cries, but you know, balanced with humor.
That's my favorite place, is laughing through tears.
Totally.
That ultimate release of every emotion at once is
right.
I seek out art that does that.
Something that moves you. That changes you.
That it's lightening in a way, you know, like you're feeling uplifted, even though you may be feeling, I hate crying, I get mad, you know, at the Today Show sometimes, because they'll show some video of a little kid doing something cute. And I'm like, God damn it, I'm not ready. It's 7 a.m.
crying.
You know, like,
it's like one of the most healing things to just, like, sometimes I'm like, oh, this feels so good to just cry.
I know.
You just said something that I'm going to skip to. I want to talk about transitions. So I would love to just have a whole conversation about the transitions in this book, because as I was reading them, I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. This is so brilliant. Did she have to go back and like add them? Did they happen naturally? So I really appreciate how you take the reader from one scene to the next.
Oh, everyone, open to page.
Yes. Actually, if you'd like to read along in your hymnal, do you mind if I read it? I'm going to have you read too.
Yeah, no, you can. We don't even need to have me read.
Oh no, I'm doing this. I'm doing this, and so are you, because you have an audiobook, and so people need to hear you read it.
Oh, that's true. I got to sell it.
We got to sell it, because I'm really excited. I've already read it and I love it, but I can't wait to hear the audiobook. But okay, so transitions. So there's this awesome way that you bring us from one scene, one chapter to the next, and most of the time you go back and forth between the Grand Canyon trip and then childhood. So these transitions are badass. So here we are. If people want to follow along in their hymnal, I am on page 84. This is ending chapter 7. And of course I get a frog in my throat. Here it comes. Here comes the breakthrough. But then, crack! Another lightning bolt spidered across the sky and sent me scrambling down the hillside. Whatever epiphany this place was going to bring me would have to wait. Chapter 8. It was the first holiday season after Dad's lightning bolt to our life. Okay, I was like, oh my God, it's so good. It's like, it reminds me of those movies.
I thought I was being too heavy-handed at times with
Really?
that,
Oh my God, I love it.
but then editors and, you know, people reading the book were like, no, it's good.
It's so good. Yeah.
I had some suggestions for a little more connection in certain places, but no, that that final back and forth structure from Grand Canyon chapter to Life chapter, someone very eloquently described it as like Grand Canyon, and then you submerge into my life, you know, like you go under, you know. That 1-and-1 back and forth came in the very last edit. You know, it was, I was, you know, sort of like, oh, now there's 3 chapters of life and now we're back in, and it was just a little all over the place and a mess. But we ended up saying, and I say we, because I'm like, I wrote this book, stop acting like, you know, but I had editors that were very good.
And advice, and yeah.
I did not have a ghostwriter. I just want to make it very clear. I wrote this book, you know.
And some people do, so I think that's fair to point out.
Yeah, no. But yeah, the back and forth of it, once I got that, it just felt so good. It was like, this is clicking now. It's clicking, and it's you know, when I sort of, the first draft, I hadn't even gone on the Grand Canyon trip yet. So the first draft of this
really
didn't have.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't.
That was my next question.
Yeah, go ahead.
But no, it's like the container really is the Grand Canyon. And so my question was, when did you decide that would be the container for the whole story?
Well, I got my notes back on the first draft, and, you know, the first drafts are garbage usually. And I wasn't prepared.
We call them your shitty first draft for a reason.
Well, see, I was ignorant, and I thought my first draft was the shitty first draft. I didn't realize the first draft that like your editor reads is the shitty first draft. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, brilliant. Click, send, you know, and then it was like, this needs a lot of work. And I was like, what? But yeah, I got the notes back, and the trip was planned. It had nothing to do with the book. And I went on the trip, and it wasn't until like 2 months later, I was like dreading getting back into writing. And I just started thinking a lot about the trip, and I was like, God, there's just so much that down there that felt relevant, and what I went through, and it's so fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
And because one of the feedback I got on it, one of the pieces of feedback was that this needs more fun and more humor and lightness and place and story. And, you know, it made me think about all that. And I was like, God, I have something that I am excited to write about. And I need that, because the other stuff was so difficult to write about that this made it easier to give it this container. And it just sort of then from there organically came together. And once I was off and running, I was like, oh, this is good. I think this could work. And
this is
I
working.
The title, and then it was like, wow, I love this, you know?
Awesome. Well, I was going to ask, you know, when you finished that draft that you thought was ready, and you sent it to the editors, and you're like, this is ready. When you finally finished the book, and in January or February, when you gave it to your family, did you like feel like, oh my God, like, did it feel like you've birthed this baby that's like, now it's good, like now it's right?
That was, that was the version where I was like, wow, like I'm a writer, you know, like I learned so much about writing in the process. Well, then they don't tell you after that there's like a zillion more rounds of edits. And I was like, going. Yeah, I'd be like, okay, we're done, send. And then they'd be like, okay, so a few more notes we need to, and I'm like, what? Like every time I thought it was over, there would be another round, but then each time it would get better and better, you know?
Better and better.
There's the copy edit, then there was proofreading. I didn't know that was, you know, there was so many little then it was like I didn't want to let go of it. I wanted to keep tinkering. I like
because you thought it'll keep getting better. Like it's gotten this much better. So if we keep going,
I still think that. I think there's like one sentence that I'm truly like, fuck. Okay, I went back and forth and I don't like it. I don't like the way I wrote that. Like nobody would ever even know. Or, I mean, but yeah, I think that it is as good as it's going to be. I've never worked on anything this much before. One single piece of writing, never. Stand up is so fleeting. And yes, you'll work on a joke for 10 years, but that joke is part of a larger rolling, evolving set. And then you retire a joke and then maybe you'll bring back an old one, but the jokes are more in the wind and they're just so short. And there was a time where I was really working hard on an hour of material, and every day I did the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and you perform every night for 30 days. And it's really way more challenging than I ever thought it would be. And every day I would sit down, I had a script, a transcript of my show, my jokes, and I would tinker with them every single day. That's probably the most intense I've ever worked on my stand-up. And that was maybe 15, no, it was probably 30 pages of text, and this is way more, so just to give you a sense of like, there was just such a bigger project. And knowing what was good writing, you go into it, I thought I'm a good writer, and then I look back and I'm like, I didn't know shit. I learned so much just about a turn of phrase or how you write memoir and things I didn't know. I mean, I'm not much of a reader. I'll be honest with you. I'm a writer. I prefer to create rather than consume, even though I do consume a lot. And I have read a lot since getting into this book, but because I was like, what are other people doing? I shouldn't have, there were some books I shouldn't have read. They were too intimidating. Like, you read, I was like, what are the best memoirs? And then I was like, oh my God, these people's lives are so much more interesting than mine. Then that's not a good spot to get into. But I read a whole variety of books, and then I was like, oh, that's how you just realize, like, oh, there's a way to tell a story this way or that way. It was good to get a sort of like taste of a buffet of different types of memoirs that made me realize, like, oh, it's not so much the story you're telling, it's how you tell it.
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, you could say, hey, you had a good life, like, nothing terrible happened. You didn't grow up, being beaten.
No.
I mean, something sad things did happen. I don't want to downplay that.
No, yeah, I've had trauma, but it's not, there was a lot of struggle to accept. And kind of what we were talking about earlier was like, is my story worthy?
Right.
Is it good enough? Is it important enough?
Oh my gosh.
It was a really huge hurdle for me to get over, because I just thought, God, nobody fucking cares. Like, just, this is so stupid. And I get that little voice sometimes still in my head, but now I'm just sort of like, you know what? Everybody's story is valid, and there's a place for it. I've read memoirs that are truly nothing happens, and they're wonderful, like,
it's how it's the telling, right? Like you said, it's the telling.
Yeah. So, I think, I feel very privileged in my life, but I have problems just like anybody else. It's how I feel about the pandemic. It's like, some people are really going through some shit right now, and I don't know what that's like. Or the conversation, do you have kids or do you not have kids? How much harder it is if you have kids and all that. And it's like, but that doesn't make my experience invalid.
Exactly.
I'm allowed. Yes. Now, I think we need to be judicious about how we express our pain and in a public forum of like, and understand how to read the room, but I'm even like sympathetic, right? I mean, there's no way this pandemic isn't hard for almost everybody. And
absolutely.
I'm talking, like, even celebrities. I'm like, man, they don't have red carpets, that's
poor babies.
Isolation's hard.
Like,
that's your I mean, like, it's
well, I mean, and then I feel like there's so many layers to the isolation, this feeling of politically, there's civil unrest, we need social justice. Like there's so many things. And it's like, oh, my memoir. But that's the beauty of it, is that your memoir is a shining light, that reminds us how beautiful life is, to not give up on our dreams, to say, screw the haters, because I'm going to do this and I am worthy. And that message is so important. It's so well done in this book. I'm going to hold it up again. I love it so much. Okay. Wait, what were you going to say?
No.
Well, I was going to totally change the subject. So
Change it.
Okay. I want to go back to the writing, because I think one of my favorite parts about this book is the writing. So I want to talk about your use of callbacks. They're used quite often. You reference something from earlier in the book to make a point or a joke. And as a reader, like, I really like that, because it created this feeling of intimacy. Like I kind of felt like I was in on it. Like I was included on in the joke, you know what I mean? And I wonder, is this a technique that you brought over from writing comedy?
Oh yeah. Yeah. 100% from comedy. I mean, callbacks are like, part of your toolbox in comedy that is one of the most essential ones, because you can use a callback to, tie a show together, tie a joke together, and you're right. I've never heard it phrased that way, but that's a really good way to describe it. It's a feeling of being on the inside of, like, you get it. It's an inside
like
joke.
I'm clever. Ooh, I got that.
You were here for the other part, and now you get to enjoy this because you were paying attention. It's a reward.
Yes.
But also I think callbacks work. They're inside jokes in a way, because, that they're big in my family. It's like, there was a point where I talk about my mom yelling at some lady in the driveway of our house. And
I love your mom, by the way.
Yeah.
During that scene, I was like, go mom.
Yeah. She comes in and do like, some people do just not get it, and then I wrote, we got it. I got it. I love feeling like I'm in with you, and we speak the same language. We're part of something together, and I think that is a very normal human desire. And so that makes me feel so good that you felt that in my book, because that's how I want people to feel in my life. That is, I want you to feel like you belong around me, because that's what I'm looking for.
Oh, that's it. Aren't we all, though? That's so cool.
Yeah.
I loved it. You also kid around with the reader a lot, I love it when you're in a scene and all of a sudden you're like, and of course I slept soundly throughout the night, and everything was perfect, and then you're like, just kidding, it was the worst night of my life, I didn't get any sleep. And it's like, this moment where I'm going along with you and I'm like, yeah, it's so perfect. And, oh no, life's not perfect. And it's like, it's perfectly jarring in the way that it kind of wakes me up, because you had me. I'm like going with it. Oh, just kidding.
Yeah. It can be, that was one thing that was like worked really well in the audiobook, because I knew the touch of sarcasm and in it, but it was something I had to really tinker with, and I got feedback on, which was like, this reads like a joke, like a stand-up joke, like it's meant to be read out loud. And I was like, well, that is what I do. So that
right. Yeah.
That you're getting that from it. But interestingly, in the when I was recording the audiobook, some parts were like, oh, this works better written on the page, and it's not as good read out loud. And it was interesting to see just creatively, like, which parts were working better. And I mean, it wasn't like it didn't work at all, but it was definitely like a cool experience I've never been through before.
Was it hard to read your own book and know that, like, this is going to be an audiobook?
No, I was like, I will be reading the audiobook. I was like, this is what I'm born to do. I was surprised at how challenging it was at first. I kind of wish I'd gone back and been like, can we re-record chapter 1? Because now I'm warmed up and I get it.
Oh yeah.
I kind of wish I'd done that, but I'm happy with how it turned out. I heard 1 minute of it. They sent me a little clip to put out, and I was like, I will never listen to this because I hate this. Normally I'm okay with the sound of my own voice, but I was like, lady, stop talking. Like, shut your mouth. That's how I
Too
felt.
much.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of you reading your book, would you mind reading a
Sure.
segment?
All right. Let me I want to be able to see myself, and I've hidden my self view right now so that I don't just be like this the whole time. I just want to make sure I'm not like blocking my face. Okay. All right. This is from Grant by Sara Schaefer.
Good for you.
Do I say chapter 10? What do I do? I've never done this.
Well, if we need a little bit of place, tell us like
Yeah.
if we need to know where we are and what's happening, just kind of fill us in and then read.
You actually don't need it with this. That's how good of a writer I am. Okay.
Damn good. Do it.
When I started college, guys, I'm starting college. That's what. Okay, here we go. When I started college, I'd been dreaming of going for the better part of 6 years. Ever since my nerd camp, SEP, had given me a taste. I would be attending the College of William and Mary, which sounds like a fancy private school, but is actually a state school that I could afford to pay for by myself through student loans. As excited as I was for this new chapter, I was also freaking out about it. I was a little concerned about my faith. On campus, the devil would surely be afoot, and I worried about not fitting in. Would any of these strangers relate to my simultaneous appreciation of the hipster Christian teachings of Jars of Clay and the period blood moon howlings of Tori Amos? But these were trifles compared to a much larger looming fear. Thumb. Yep, remember Thumb? And you have to know, I am a thumb sucker. Still to this day. Remember Thumb? I was sucking it this entire time. I had been a master concealer of my habit, but I knew college might leave me exposed. Thumb was so intrinsically a part of my existence that I wouldn't even realize I was doing it. And this fact implanted a terror in me so deep I barely slept for the weeks leading up to freshman orientation. For this reason, it was vital that I showed up on the first day looking fly. Makeover sequences in film and TV have taught women to subconsciously expect that their entire lives can change with the right haircut. So the day before move-in, I excitedly sat down in a salon chair and specifically requested a minor trim with long layers, a radical choice. The stylist nodded and prepared her scissors for transformation. Have you ever pranked your hairstylist? Like when they make that first cut, you scream and pretend they made a horrible mistake? It's fun, you should try it. What's not fun is when you actually scream because they're actually making a horrible mistake. The woman had cut a chunk 2 inches above my eyebrows, which, if you factor in my curl, resulted in a 1/2 inch lock of hair boinging perpendicularly off my face. That monster had given me a bang. What are you doing? The entire salon of yappy suburban ladies fell silent. The stylist said, I'm cutting your bangs. I was just doing what you told me to do. If I had actually died right then, which is what I felt like doing, my final words would have been a quivering whisper. Long layers, long layers. The light leaves my eyes and I go to Jesus. I'll skip ahead here. I got into the car and drove home screaming. This was not how I had intended on beginning my new life. As I pulled into the driveway, Mom was driving out in the kidnap wagon, which was what we nicknamed her weird minivan.
Which I love, by the way.
Storage van that she drove. Cargo van, sorry. She rolled down the window, a huge smile on her face. Let me see your hair! I shrieked from my car window to hers. Awful! I could barely get the words out through the sobs. Ruined! She sobbed, stopped the van and got out, and I could tell from her reaction that I wasn't imagining the destruction. I don't know. Should I do more? Should I skip ahead? What's the protocol here?
Let's leave it there.
I mean, you got to find out.
Let's let people know, buy the book to find out what happens. I love that scene. And by the way, I have really unruly curly hair myself, and I've been there. I've been in that chair where I had to yell, "Oh my God!"
I just got these cut. They look really good right now, but this will become such a mess. And yes, for some reason they're not that curly. See, this is why you hide your self view, because now I'm like,
now you're looking at yourself.
It's too much.
It's hard not to look at yourself on Zoom. It really is. Yeah. It's human. But, I guess you need to know if something's going awry, but I try to ignore it. All right. Let's talk about a problem you have, if you don't mind. So you're a birthday Scrooge.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. I kid. It's not a problem. My birthday is July 14th. So I'm with you, but I think I might've done the opposite. So I have a question for you, but the minute I became adult, so to speak, I would throw myself huge parties, like huge parties, the kind that like the neighbors call the cops and, potentially it's possible you get evicted after the party. Like that's how summer birthdays affected me. So what I want to know is how do you you went to the Grand Canyon on your birthday, but how do you normally celebrate your birthday as an adult? Do you
so normally when I'm not making a big deal about it, like I did for my 40th, I just have dinner with I just got to eat with my man and maybe a couple friends, and that's it.
Keeping it on the down low.
No presents, nothing.
Really? No presents?
No. I mean, sometimes like family will send me presents sometimes, and I really appreciate it, but it's not, I'm not expecting it. And you have to be careful when you're like this. You have to be careful because you don't take your birthday seriously. You don't realize how personal people take it if you don't give them the energy that they are used to. And I think I have hurt people's feelings before by being like, what, happy birthday? Like, I don't care.
It's just a birthday. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I have to realize, like, I have like reminders in my calendar and like, just be like, don't, it's something I have to actually like work at. Like, I'm not naturally very good at celebrating other people's birthdays for them.
So what's your favorite holiday?
I do love Christmas, a lot, but, yeah, Christmas, Thanksgiving's great too, but yeah, I think Christmas is probably my number one holiday because of kids and the decorations. I really go all out with the decorations. But I also just love summertime and our annual beach vacation, which I was going to write more about in the book, but it just didn't fit. I don't think I barely even mentioned it, but we have a yearly tradition to go to the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and it's that's my favorite time of year. That was my mom's favorite place.
Cool. And Julie has joined us.
Yeah.
I have one more thing I want to say.
Yeah.
I've been stalking you on Twitter. I hope that's okay.
Yes,
and
right.
I was very disappointed to see that Christy gives away the fact that you are not eaten by a bear in your memoir.
I know.
Which begs the question.
Yeah.
Why?
Why was I not murdered?
Why did she have to tell people that you...
So this past weekend, NBC News has like a blog called Think Pieces or, whatever. And they published an excerpt from the book, but they did not really make it clear that it was an excerpt. And they put it with a headline that was like, I went camping with my sister. I thought camping with my sister in the Grand Canyon would be a great idea at first.
It's like that noir.
Right. They were about to read a story of me cutting my own arm off or something. And I understand why people were upset, but the angry messages I got about this isn't news. Why do I care? Menopausal. I'm like, menopausal?
What is happening?
I'm like, when do you think menopause happens?
Yeah, you're quite a few years away from that.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Well, for one, I'm really glad that you didn't die in your memoir. Thank you.
I am too. I mean, look, if you're looking for that kind of story, this isn't it. This is a story of mental survival of
amen to that.
That. And I mean, I'm interested. Some people have strong feelings about the ending but I love the ending. So
don't give it away.
I love the ending. No, we won't give it away. No, the ending's perfect, and the container wraps it up so nicely. It's a redemption story in my mind. It's a typical finding yourself.
If you have anxiety, this book will make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that's important. And who doesn't? I mean,
but that's
at
what
least
I'm saying.
a little bit.
Yeah, especially nowadays. Yeah,
exactly. Sarah, I'm so glad you were here. Jennifer, that was a great conversation. Yeah, it's, and I feel the same way. It's like, why are we writing, and it's why are we bringing this content out? It's like we all need to realize that there's things to celebrate, and there's things to appreciate, and there's things to, you know, we too shall pass through all of this. And so
yes, exactly. Thank you. That's so nice.
Yeah, and so having a book come out during this time is a huge challenge. So we want to lift up as many voices as we can, and hopefully people will buy the book from Warwick's, but whatever you do, buy Sarah's book. Hold it up one more time.
So much. I really appreciate it.
This book is so good. And if you, it doesn't matter if you read memoir. It doesn't matter. It reads like a novel. It's funny, it's heartwarming, it's real, it's really, really well written.
That is so nice. Thank you so much. It really means a lot coming from y'all, because you know. So
yeah. Well, we appreciate it. I'm going to end the recording. So thank you, everybody. Peace out.
Thank you. Bye.
And